Hi guys, I am here to read a little bit more of The Hardy Boys, the Viking Symbol Mystery. We left off last time with chapter 7. We're going to be reading chapter 8, where the boys and the big Canadian guy, they were on a canoe going through the water trying to get somewhere. I can't remember exactly where. And, they're looking for those people, Kelly and stuff. And anyway, they was in the boat, and let me read the last part. The stream grew suddenly rougher, and the lightweight craft rocked from side to side. "Tonore! Caribou!" boomed over the sound of the wind. "Hang on!" The boys gripped the edges of the canoe to steady themselves as it heaved up and down in the growing swell. Chet, who was seated in the bow, grasped and exclaimed, "We sprung a leak!" So that's where we're taking off from today. Now we're on chapter 8. And this one is called Missing Campers. This is a long chapter, so bear with me. "We are sinking," shouted Caribou. "To shore!" Just then there was a sputter, and the outboard motor conked out. "Scarebleu!" the French Canadian yelled. Frank and Joe grabbed paddles while Chet tore off his shirt and used it to plug the hole in the canoe. The Hardys paddled furiously while Caribou pulled at the motor's starting rope. The outboard coughed once, but did not turn over. "Motor's probably flooded from the spray," Joe panted. "What luck!" Caribou also seized a paddle, and his strong back muscles flexed as he strained to help turn the rocking boat toward shore. Frank felt as though his aching arms would break. Perspiration glistened on his and Joe's foreheads. In spite of Chet's efforts to plug the leak, the water poured in. "Paddle!" shouted Caribou. "Faster, boys, faster!" Frank and Joe put greater effort into their strokes. The heavily laden canoe pushed and plowed its way through the waves, and as the bow neared shore, suddenly touched bottom. Chet leaped out into knee-deep water. Frank, Joe, and Caribou followed. Grabbing the sides of the boat, they hauled it up over the rocks onto a small beach. Exhausted, the foursome dropped to the sand to rest. As soon as Joe had caught his breath, he said disgustingly, "We'll have a hard time finding the thieves now." "Bon terre!" Caribou shouted, leaping to his feet. "We must unload gear before she gets wet." "And how?" Chet cried as the boys jumped up. "Rescue the food?" Within the 4 working quickly, the canoe was emptied and turned over. The Hardys even explained the bottom of the metal craft. "Hey," Frank cried out, "look! This leak was caused deliberately." Everyone crowded around to look. Very cleverly, 5 of the rivets had held the aluminum sides to the keel and had been taken out and replaced with bits of putty. "Pretty foxy, whoever did it," said Joe, sitting back on his heels. The putty would be waterproof and hold tight until strain was put on the hull. "If we hadn't moved fast," Chet put it, "we'd be swimming right now." "Tonre!" Caribou shouted. "That rascal nearly succeeded this time, but no more." "You mean your friend Dulac?" Frank asked, "or one of the thieves?" The trapper shrugged, and Joe said, "It's anybody's guess. But whoever did it must have sneaked into the boatyard and tampered with the canoe while we were gone." "I think I can make repairs," Caribou said, and went to work quickly, using bits of bent wire. Finally the craft was placed back in the water and proved seaworthy. After cleaning and refueling the outboard motor, the boys and their guide set out down the river. It was growing dusky. "We'll have to stop for the night soon," Caribou advised. They cruised along smoothly, and after a time spotted a canoe coming upstream. In the craft sat 2 men in khakis. "Hunters," said Caribou. "Let's ask them if they seen a raft with gasoline drums aboard," Frank suggested, and held the men. The wind had died down, so the 2 canoes now lay quietly side by side. Caribou questioned the hunters, since they spoke only French. There was a rapid-fire discussion among the 3. After a few minutes, Caribou pushed the other boat and waved as the strangers continued their trip upstream. "They have come right from the mouth of the river," he reported. "They saw no boat towing a raft." Frank frowned. "The thief may have reached a float plane already and pulled into the hiding along the shore if he spotted those men." "That is right," Caribou agreed, "but now it is too dark to look for him. Ahead I see good camping place for us." A few minutes later the searchers entered a small cove with a smooth beach. The boys hopped out and slid the canoe carefully up a gently shelving rock. After unloading the supplies, they carried the craft onto the beach and placed it on props. Frank took a 3/4 axe from the pack and began gathering firewood. Joe went down to the bank to catch fish for supper, while Chet spread reindeer moss, which he covered with balsam tips for a sleeping area. He rolled out the boys' sleeping bags onto his cushioning. Caribou sat down on a rock and watched as the 3 boys worked rapidly and efficiently. "You are good campers," he said. "Officially impressed." The fire was hot when Joe returned with a half-dozen grayling. The fish were quickly fried, and the hungry travelers ate them with canned stewed tomatoes and brown bread. After they had finished the meal and cleaned the cooking utensils, Joe put another log on the fire, and the 4 sat back and relaxed. "Why are you called Caribou?" Frank asked the trapper. Caribou said that when he was a small boy, he had come to this territory from the Ungava district near Labrador. "No caribou there. I was very smart," he grinned widely. "The first time I see one, I think it is a cow." He spoke in his old patos. "Trapper, tell me to pet the cow, so I walk up to the big caribou. I get a surprise. She turn quickly and rush at me. I run fast, just make it to the tree, but her horns tear my pants." The 3 boys laughed heartily, and Chet said, "Moo, some cow." "After that," said Caribou, "all the trappers in the North Country call me Caribou Karen." The Bruley men regaled his young companions with several hair-raising stories of his life in the North. Then they all crawled into their sleeping bags and were soon in deep slumber. Joe did not know how long he had been asleep when he heard a crack loud enough to make him sit up and listen intently. The fire had died down, and the air was still. He glanced around the campfire. Caribou and Chet were not there. Joe, alarmed, shook his brother awake. Frank rolled over drowsily and asked, "What's wrong?" "Caribou and Chet are gone," Joe told him. Frank finally became awake. "Gone?" he echoed. "Where?" "I don't know. Something must have awakened them," Joe answered, and they went to investigate. The Hardys threw more wood on the fire to light up the area. As the chips flared out brightly, they began to search of the campsite. Suddenly, from the far side of the fire came shh. The Hardys swung around. Out of the shadows stepped a medium-sized, roughly dressed man. He was wiry and tough-looking. "Who are you?" Frank demanded. "What are you doing here?" The man attempted a weak smile, then said, "My name is Salu, and I've come to warn you about your guide, Caribou Karen." "What about Caribou?" Joe asked. He intensely did not like the man. "Karen is dangerous, mentally unbalanced," the stranger said, "and he's leading you on a wild goose chase." "Where is Caribou now?" Frank asked wearily. "He has taken your friend as a hostage," Salu said with a sneer. "A hostage?" Joe repeated. "I don't believe you." "It's true," the stranger insisted, edging his way closer to Frank. "You fellows had better go back to Fort Smith, or you'll be next." "Look out!" Joe yelled suddenly. But he was too late. Bam! Salu swung a powerful right punch at Frank. The boy had no time to duck as the rock-like fist cracked against his jaw. As Frank dropped unconscious by the fire, Joe leaped across the flames at Salu. With a shocking tackle, Joe brought him down. The stranger's feet came up in a vicious kick and knocked the wind out of the boy. Shaking his head and gasping for breath, Joe reached around the man's neck and hung on. The 2 rolled on the ground. coming dangerously close to the red-hot coals of the campfire. The top of Joe's head grew hot as Selous forced him nearer and nearer the flames. Suddenly from the darkness came a great roar. Bon Terre! Caribou crashed through the brush, slashing at branches with his mighty arms. Behind him was Chet. Caribou crossed the fire in a leap. Grasping the stranger by the shoulders, he pulled him off Joe and flung him away. Selous flew through the air, arms and legs waving wildly, but the wiry man knew how to fall. As his weight hit the ground, he rolled quickly to his feet and disappeared in the darkness. "After him!" Chet cried. "No!" boomed Caribou. We never find him in the dark. Help Frank." Chet came back to his friend, and Joe scrambled up to assist. Frank roused when the boys put cold water on his head, and he sat up groggily. "Wow, did he pack a punch," he said. "That was Abner Duloc," Karen snorted in disgust. "A dangerous fox." "What's he got against us?" Frank asked, touching his jaw gingerly. "Anybody who is a friend of mine is an enemy of Duloc," Caribou answered. "It was the low-down weasel all the time." The Hardys looked puzzled, and Chet explained. "I heard a noise like a bear prowling and woke up Caribou. We followed the sound. Duloc must have circled back to steal our gear." "Why?" asked Joe in surprise. Caribou smiled wryly. "One reason Duloc will take anything. He is a thief. Up here in the north you die if you have no gear." Joe grimaced. "Great mackerel! You mean he'd let us die?" Caribou nodded solemnly. "I warned you that Duloc is a mean one." Chet looked apprehensive. "Do you think he'll keep on the trail and cause us more trouble?" The big trapper shrugged. "It could be so. We will have to keep eyes in the back of our heads." Frank had been silent, mulling over the recent incident. Now he said, "What I can't figure out is why Duloc went to all the trouble of following us here, even using a phony name to trick us. He must be up to something more serious than robbing traps or trying to spite you, Caribou." The others agreed. "But what?" Joe puzzled. "No more mysteries tonight," Chet begged. "How about a little sleep?" The boys and Caribou were soon back in their bags. They dozed off, but their rest was fitful. The next morning was bright and clear. After washing in the bracing river, the group had a good breakfast. Everyone pitched in to break camp. Then they set out in the canoe again. As the sun grew hotter, hordes of insects buzzed about the boys' heads, and they quickly covered their upper bodies with the netting they had brought along. "Dad was right about these pests," Joe said, slapping at the persistent black fly. Oh, that was the worst one, remember? During the next 4 hours, they navigated down the rapidly moving river, searching for the gasoline raft. They were perspiring from the heat and were growing discouraged when Frank suddenly pointed to the shore. "Over there!" he called out. A crude log raft was barely visible under low-hanging brush. "Quick, Caribou, cut the motor!" and the boys paddled swiftly to shore. Joe jumped out first and ran to the raft. Reaching it, he called excitedly, "We found it! I can smell gasoline!" And that was chapter 8. So that is where we're going to stop there tonight. I hope you guys enjoyed chapter 8, and we'll be back soon with chapter 9. Bye, guys.